is One Eye on the Horizon, a podcast specifically for people who have suffered sight loss in one eye. I lost my sight in my right eye in August 2024 in a shocking, traumatic accident. And I found it really difficult to find anybody else who was in the same boat, slightly further along the journey than me, who could tell me what it was going to be like and ultimately show me that everything was going to be okay. I felt lonely, even though I was wrapped in so much love and support from everybody around me. It was something that I had to work out myself, and I had to do a lot of searching to find stories of people in the same boat. So, in the spirit of, if you can see it, you can be it, or in this case, if you're only listening, if you can hear it, I've designed a podcast to share as many of our stories as possible, to help lift, inspire, and encourage people who are newer to this journey than us. If you're listening because you've already lost your sight or you're losing your sight in one eye, we're here for you. We see you and we feel you. You can dive in here to feel less alone and to understand that you are definitely not the only one experiencing all of these feelings and all of these physical challenges. Hear the stories of others, feel validated in what you're going through, and most importantly, understand that it is going to be okay. And hopefully we can have a little laugh along the way, because laughter makes even the heaviest things feel ever so slightly lighter. I'm Charlie, and this is One Eye on the Horizon. Hello and welcome. Today's episode is with an incredible lady called Hattie. She is known as Monocular Doctor online. She has a great social media presence in which she's sharing the reality of life with one eye. She is a British adaptive cheerleader competing for our country. She is a high rocks competitor. She is about to try and run a half marathon. She does incredibly inspiring things, and she does this all with impaired vision. And we dive in, talk about that, about sharing her story online, and about all of her experience of growing up with visual impairment and eventually deciding to remove one of her eyes. This is a fascinating conversation. I know you're going to love it. So let's dive in. Hi, Hattie. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Where I'd like to start is to get a bit of a picture as to what's got you to who you are and where you are today. I know I usually ask people what life was like before sight loss, but I know that the journey's been a lot longer for you. So can you just fill us in a little bit as to what life started out like and how you've got through to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born what was suspected to be with two normal eyes, but was quickly realised that my iris on my right hand side was kind of greyish and didn't look quite right. So I was taken by my parents to the doctors who diagnosed a cataract and then glaucoma. So it was a congenital cataract and glaucoma. And then I subsequently went through 5 operations between being 8 weeks old and 18 months old. And growing up then, they didn't really know what type of vision I would have because I was so little and couldn't necessarily tell them. So I went through things like patching and lots of tests and things like that. And they didn't know, again, what my vision would be like or remain like in my left eye. As I got older and able to communicate, my right eye was more of a bit like a steamed up bathroom mirror, I think is probably the best description. So I could see outlines and colours and shapes, but no real detail. And that kind of deteriorated over time. So I only really had light perception as an adult. So I've never fully had vision in my right eye. But then my right eye was removed in 2020, at the end of 2020, because the areas where I'd had the previous surgery was quite at risk of rupturing. And the eye had become quite painful, and I obviously didn't have a great deal of useful vision by that point. So they offered to remove it for me. So I had a prosthetic replacement. And then my left eye, I do still have vision in. I'm very grateful for that. But I do have a couple of eye conditions in that side as well. So I have a nystagmus. And then they discovered later in my life that I also have plateau iris syndrome, meaning that I'm at risk of the other type of glaucoma in that eye and potentially losing my vision in the future, and the early startings of a cataract. So we might be heading for more surgery on that side as well in the future.
Yeah, okay. we'll dive into that in a little while, because I also have a similar thing, and I think there's something to be said about the kind of low level worry that has, how's it going to pan out in the future. But let's not go there quite yet. Growing up as a child then with, I don't know, would we call it impaired vision at that point when you were young?
Yeah, it probably was. I mean, I was not really using the right side. It became quite evident when I got to the door handle height of an age, just because I kept bumping into them all. So I think at that point they really realised, no, she cannot see out that side. Just because the amount of times I accidentally walked into those and poked my eye with them, it's not ideal.
Well, I think everybody with one eye can probably relate to hitting their face on things at some point. I certainly can.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what was childhood like then, growing up with a slight difference and that struggle and that bumping into things? How did that feel for you?
I think it's almost two extremes. I would argue one extreme was I knew it looked different and I felt it looked different because I was missing an iris from the previous surgeries. So it was big and it was black and it looked different. The eye was quite contrasting to my other eye. And I knew as a child it did look different. Right. And so I felt a little bit different, I guess. But the contrast of that was that my parents very much brought me up to be like, you can do anything you put your mind to. If you want something, you go after it. You find what you're good at and you work hard for it. So I would almost argue it was, like I say, two very, very extreme versions. I think the things I noticed, my nystagmus on my left-hand side, I actually have like what they call a null point. So it's the point at which my nystagmus is best controlled, and the eye sits the stillest, I guess. And that is with my head turned slightly. So there's a lot of childhood pictures of me looking into the corner of my nose and just sort of looking at the camera like this. There's pictures of me from 18 months old like that. Wow. And so I compensated without realizing. It might have been something like an adaptation in school, but again didn't really faze me. I just kind of got on with it. I think as children do. I think you just accept that that's the way life is and that's what you get on with. Yeah. So I do think in that way, I tried not to feel like it was any different, but also could recognize that it really was, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. It makes perfect sense. And just for anybody that doesn't know who's listening, your nystagmus, can you tell us what that actually is? How does that show up?
So it can be a sign of eye conditions, or it can be a sign of other neurological conditions. So people might have them from, say, a brain problem or something else. But for me personally, mine is a flickering of my eye just back and forth. And I have I've had it in both eyes. And interestingly, behind my prosthetic, you can still see the muscles just twitching in the exact same way, which I didn't realize would be a thing. But it is just a congenital problem for me. It's just a flickering of my eye side to side. So from a day-to-day perspective, my brain seems to get rid of that shaking through most things. So when I'm looking around, things are still. Wow. I notice it in a couple of points. So I notice it worse with like really sort of thin pinstripes on, say, clothing. And so if somebody's got a shirt that's really thin, stripy, it just looks like it's moving side to side.
Wavy stripes.
Yeah. And then a little bit like an optical illusion would. Yeah. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And then also things like train and bus timetables where you have the orange on the black, that tends to flicker a little bit. And I notice it more if I'm tired as well. So if I'm more sort of fatigued, like at the end of the day, and it just is a bit more noticeable, and I might see like a flickering over in the edge of my vision or something like that. But day to day, things sit very still, which is a very powerful brain thing, I think.
It's absolutely incredible what the brain does, isn't it? So I lost my eye only 18 months ago, and I've just been astounded by how my brain has completely adapted to having one eye.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
But also I note what you said about if you're feeling tired, then your brain finds it harder to do those things, which has also made me realise just how hard it's working behind there to make everything still look and feel right, or as normal as it can do. So fascinating stuff. So I wonder whether it's worth us talking a little bit about when you finally had your eye removed and what that felt like for you. I noted that you said that that happened at the end of 2020, which was obviously an interesting year health-wise for everybody.
It was.
And I'd be curious to hear how that impacted this portion of the journey. Do you want to just kind of fill us in on how all of this went?
Yeah, absolutely. My eyes started to become painful in 2018, 2019. It's never really been that painful before. I just kind of got on with it the way that it was. But when it started to become painful, I started to seek, reviews with consultants and ophthalmologists to sort of say, what's wrong with it? Why is it suddenly hurting me? And when I actually was able to compare pictures, you could see it had got bigger over time and also become quite red and inflamed and sore. And they said, essentially, it's at risk of rupturing, and you don't want to do anything that might increase the pressure and therefore cause a rupture. So that was something like going on a plane ride or a roller coaster. Fortunately, not into roller coasters massively, but planes I like because they take me on holiday. But the other thing was I had just got into powerlifting because I have a problem with my connective tissue and joints, which has nothing to do with my eyes. It's just unlucky, I think. But it meant that I went into lifting weights to try and improve my joint pain, which it does. I found that I was relatively competitive with the weights I was lifting. And I thought, oh, I'll have a go at this. So I went into some powerlifting competitions and actually qualified to compete at the British powerlifting competition, only for once I'd circled around the ophthalmology consultants for them to tell me, you can't do that anymore because your eye's going to rupture. And if you start squatting and deadlifting really heavy weights, you can rupture it. So at that point, it was definitely holding me back. It was limiting me. And they said, well, we can take it out. We can give you a prosthetic. And I said, yeah, go ahead. But of course, with the pressures of the NHS, add in then COVID, that took about a year for it to come through to say we can do it. And I literally actually only got 8 days notice for them saying,
wow,
can you come in and have it done? And it was done 2 days before Christmas.
Gosh.
So it was a very last minute phone call. But equally, it was something I did want by that point. I was ready to get that next part of my life going where I could travel on the plane and I could, recompete again. And I was determined that that was what I was going to do. And going back to that mindset of you can do anything you put your mind to that my parents instilled in me, that is what I went to do. So I decided that would happen afterwards and asked my consultants about whether I could lift and how long I could lift after my surgery. And then I did actually start lifting just lightly 6 weeks post-op. 12 weeks post-op, I was allowed to lift a bit more reasonably. And then I re-qualified for the English and the British the following year, so 2021.
Which is incredible. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But I just want to circle back to this, well, to me, it doesn't really say, I was going to say this decision that you had to make, am I going to take my eye out or not? But it feels like what you're saying to me is actually it was a fairly clear cut. Yeah, we're definitely doing that. But I'm wondering about the build up to that. You'd had a couple of years of pain and restriction in your life, as it were. During that period, were you already thinking this might be something I would need to do? And did you go through a process of understanding what that looked like? Or was it always just a gut instinct? Yeah, it's time for the eye to go.
I mean, I am quite a decisive person in lots of ways, but I didn't like the fact that it was limiting me. So the decision to have it out was very simple for me, but it didn't then come without fear. We read the risks of sympathetic ophthalmitis, so you can get inflammation in your remaining eye if you have the other one taken out. Then when you're looking and staring in the face of, well, I will absolutely only have one eye, I won't have any light perception on that side. What happens if that happens? And all these questions. And also, I think when you are so used to looking a certain way, because when I was a teenager, when I was a child, I wasn't confident with the way that I looked. But as I got into my 20s, I was very much sort of the attitude, well, this is my face and this is what it looks like. And the people who are right will stay and they won't mind. And I got into that mindset, and I'm so glad that I didn't have my eye removed before I got that mindset, because that helped with the fear of what if I actually get a worse outcome. Because my eye was so much bigger, they said, oh, your eyelids might be too big and you might need eyelid surgery, to essentially like plastic surgery to make them shorter, and also not really knowing what it would look like. And I feel so grateful because I have had an amazing experience with the surgery and the prosthetics, and the actual appearance of my prosthetic is more than I could have expected. But the unknown is the fear, isn't it? You know, I've made this decision, but actually, will it work? Will it be the right decision? That's human, I think. So I did have that, but I still knew it was the right choice. So it made it slightly easier.
Yeah, and I think for anybody who's losing vision or has suddenly lost an eye, the unknown is just, I certainly found it quite overwhelming to start with. There's just so many questions that you don't know. And mine was through an accident, so it wasn't a choice. Whereas you probably had longer to ruminate on the what ifs.
Yeah.
Will it turn out okay? And it's incredible to see that it has, and you have your beautiful eye. But yeah, I can just imagine that I personally feel like there's a lot of kind of connecting with your intuition and just trusting, no, I've got this gut feeling. And it sounded like you were like, no, I've got this gut feeling, it needs to go and it's going to be better once it's gone. And trusting that and moving with that and trying to just kind of breathe through that fear and do it anyway, whilst scared, is quite a powerful thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I knew in my own mind that even if the sort of the appearance of it was worse, even if I struggled to get on board with my new appearance, as it were, then I knew that at least the pain would go, and I would be able to get back on track with what I was hoping to achieve. The only downside is you never know what can happen with surgery and if things can go wrong. And of course, when it's your choice, you then might question, did I make the right choice? Whereas, as you say, with yours, you didn't have that choice. They don't allow you almost to say, do you want to so much? In some cases, of course.
Yeah.
And the same for, say, people who have cancer and things like that. You don't really have so much of an option. You still, of course, have a choice, but it's a little bit more from my side was, what if I make the wrong choice?
Yeah.
Because I can still live with what I've got. It doesn't change much else. It's just that, would I want to be that limited? Would I want to, feel restricted or in fear of, will it rupture? And the answer was, I didn't really. That made my decision for me.
Yeah. And what about those first few months then, after you had your eye removed and you were getting used to absolutely no light perception on that side? Did that make a difference to your experience of how you saw the world, depth perception, all that kind of thing? Did you have to relearn, or was it kind of picking up from where you were before?
It wasn't too different, fortunately. I think in the first couple of weeks, it took that time for my brain to go, oh, we don't have light coming in from that side anymore. And I think I hear about people talk about phantom limb pain. And I would experience things where I was like, I'm sure I can see that side, which of course I know medically I can't. My eye has gone. But I just felt, I think it's obviously, if you look around the room, you know what this side of the room looks like. Even when you look straight forward, you can no longer see it. And I would be like, I know that thing's over there. I'm sure I can see it. Like, I couldn't, but it was a weird brain getting used to this idea. And I think my nystagmus was a little bit worse in the first couple of weeks adjusting, but long term, not so much, because of the fact that I had only lived with one eye beforehand. So it didn't make a huge amount of difference. The adaptations required for working with one eye were things I fortunately have practiced beforehand. And the recovery wise from it did definitely take me by surprise. I think I didn't really know what to expect. And I think I was in your position that you were saying, where you didn't know anybody who'd been through it. You didn't know what it might look like. You didn't know what the other side of it might look like. And I didn't either. So I didn't know anybody who had it, who had shared any versions of it. And you get all the leaflets saying this can happen, and you can read online about that this can happen, but it's almost seeing it is the difference, and the thing that would have helped, I think, hence the fabulous nature of your podcast, just know what it might be like on the other side. But I think the thing that surprised me the most was how much fluid leaked out of it over the first few weeks. I had quite a lot of like serous fluid leaking out of it, and I had quite a lot of swelling behind it. So I had a plastic conformer, and I know sometimes in some areas they'll have your eyelid shut for however long, and they'll leave a compression bandage on. Don't know whether mine was because of how close it was to Christmas, but the following morning after the surgery, they took my bandage off and I was sent home. And then my entire side of my face swelled up with how much sort of swelling from the surgery there was. So I had this lovely little hamster cheek on my side, but I tracked my progress every single day to see what it looks like. And it's quite interesting to look back on. You're just in survival mode at the time. You just get on with it. You just do what you need to do. And also the feeling of pressure was the other thing I remember. Like I couldn't lay down very easily or lean forwards. It just felt
Yes.
really full. I don't know if yours felt the same when you had
Yeah.
yours, but those were the things I think that surprised me the most. But actually, I think for me, very much like I have to focus on a goal. That's how
Yeah.
I work. That's the thing that works well for me. And in my head, I was like, I am getting back into the British powerlifting competition. This is what I'm going to do. And also, it was that exciting moment of I can go and do what I want now. And I'd had a little dabble in cheerleading in the beginnings of university. And I thought, oh, I could do that again. So I went off and did that bit too. So it's just one of those things. I got excited by what I could now do.
Yeah.
And that is what then definitely pushed me through my recovery.
Yeah, I found that having things to aim for, goals, was definitely helpful. But after a period of grief and despair, now slightly different, our stories are different because mine was a very shocking accident. So there was a process of 4 or 5 months of just literally processing what had happened.
Yeah, 100%.
But after that, absolutely, I practiced the 1% kind of method where I say, right, this feels pretty horrible right now, but if I can do something each week to feel 1% better or be 1% closer to where I want to be, then in a year I'll be like 52% closer, halfway to the life that I want to have. And I found that really helpful. And I've learned that from an athlete's mindset, which maybe nicely segues us in. You've already started talking about your sport and cheerleading. And tell me a little bit about, you've said that that was your goal, you wanted to get there. I'm quite interested to hear about whether that was something that was, easy is not the right word, but were there challenges in getting there because of your vision? What did that look like?
So I think something I've always been involved with little bits of sport for my entire life. So I did a bit of gymnastics when I was growing up, like quite low level, and I competed in things like Irish dancing, and musical theatre dance and that kind of thing. So I've always been involved in something, but there would be just a few moments along the way where I'd realize, oh, that's because of my vision. So examples would be things like trying to set up doing a backwards walkover. So where you stretch up, you bend backwards, pass through a handstand, and then stand back up again. I would line myself up wonkily because of the fact that my head turn would line my shoulders up wonky, and then I wouldn't do it straight. And the biggest one, and my mum always quotes this one, was when I was trying to learn to do a forward roll on the beam, because the beam is only as wide as your foot. I would set myself up and just roll straight off the side. So it was things like that then there were some adaptations to try and work with. And in things like powerlifting, particularly, squat, bench, and deadlift are the 3 lifts that we do. But it was more just making sure that I was doing it in line. So I often will try and use my nose to try and see. 'Cause from my understanding, people with 2 eyes don't see their nose really unless they're actively looking for it. Whereas I've always seen this side of my nose. So I just try and use it because I can tell when I'm turning my head like this, I can tell my nose is pointing over there. So I know I'm not looking straight. So then I use my nose, and I also use like my chest to try and line myself up for the beam, for example. But in squat, bench, and deadlift, I didn't find that limited me so much because the movements are slower and controlled, and I'm fully in control of what happens. Whereas cheerleading, completely the opposite. When you start letting go of humans above your head, watching them come down is quite hard. So I definitely got more injuries than my peers because I'd be looking up to try and catch my flyer, so the person who's in the air, and would potentially not realize how close they were to me. So I would maybe get a knee to the face or something like that quite regularly. And I would also sometimes struggle to, if I'd worked with the exact same person repeatedly, I knew where they were going, what they were doing, what the rest of my group was doing. But if it was somebody new, I could sometimes find particularly released skills quite hard to find the foot again, or to find the flyer's body or something like that. I was always quite careful to make sure that I was protective of the person who's above me, like they would not hit the floor, but it did mean that it was harder. And realizing this, and somebody said to me, have you ever heard of adaptive cheerleading? And I said, no, what's that? Absolutely, never heard of it before. And I learned that there is a whole stream of all-star cheerleading for adaptive cheerleaders, which is basically anybody who has an additional need that might require some form of adaptation to. So that might be that they are a seated wheelchair user and they throw flies above their heads in a seated position, or it might be that they have something like type 1 diabetes that needs management throughout the session, and sugar levels and things like that. There's a wide variety of things. It might be a hearing impairment, or in my case a visual impairment. And so I thought, oh well, maybe I'll go and have a look into that then, because I can already do some cheerleading, but it would be great to be surrounded by people who the point of being there is to adapt this sport to your needs. I discovered that there was a Team England for this, a team that would go to America to the World Championships and represent England for adaptive cheerleading specifically. And I thought, oh great, I'll have to go at that. Didn't really expect to get in. I thought I'd find an adaptive group somewhere, but they actually let me in, which I was quite pleased by. So then I got into adaptive cheerleading and have since become an adaptive cheerleading coach as well. So I think it was great to find the sport, but it's even better when I found the space in the sport that adapts to what I needed it to. There are still challenges. I still can see the flyer exactly the same way, but it's being supported by the people to get that right and finding ways around doing it that mean that my impairment is not my restriction.
Yeah. And I guess that a fair amount of that is just the time and space and understanding that you might need to do something slightly differently, or it might just take you a bit more practice and time to get there, that makes all the difference, right? And having
Absolutely.
a team of people around you who are also in need of time and space, I guess that just feels slightly less pressured than a team of people who are completely able-bodied.
Yeah, and it's really refreshing to watch a bunch of other people go, I have an impairment, but I'm going to go and do this fabulous thing anyway.
Yeah.
And we're going to find our way through, and we're going to work together to mean that all of our impairments are met, and we're still going to put on a great show. And I think there's really something, I think that is one of the most joyful things for me about finding adaptive sport is the community sense of what that brings. And I didn't really know about this growing up. And I think part of that comes down to that mindset of you can go and do anything, just go and do everything you want to do. And also the improved awareness and accessibility of things as time has gone on. But I'm so glad to have found that space. Even though for a lot of, say, Paralympic sports, you require a greater visual impairment. So the remaining eye that you have needs to be of lower vision, lower field, or lower acuity than what I currently have. But there are so many spaces for people who have lost one eye. And I think if it was going to be my message to anybody watching your podcast going, oh my goodness, what could life look like for me? And you are in any way remotely interested in any sports, go and find that community because it's so fabulous. And I've just had the best experience. Even just recently, I competed in High Rocks and they have an adaptive category, and the visual impairment category is partial or full loss of vision. So counted for the partial. And the way I was looked after was unbelievable. It was so good. And also then all of the adaptive athletes on the race at the same time on the floor were all cheering each other on and, really encouraging each other and finding each other on social media afterwards and sending words of encouragement and support. And it's just so joyful to even get to be part of that. And I think that's one of the best things I would encourage anyone to do who's in that position. Go find your space, go find your people, because there's so many out there and it's fabulous.
And also move your body. Don't be scared to move your body anymore. Aha.
Yeah.
This is something that it's really close to my heart. So since losing my eye, I didn't realise until recently I've started yoga teacher training. And as part of that, we were doing some somatic movement. We were doing like this free movement, free dance class. And the woman asked us to stand with our eyes closed and our arms stretched out wide and spin. And I did it. I was really worried that I'd bump into people, so I actually apologised before I started. But I spun round and round and round, and it actually made me really sob because I realised that I hadn't moved my body in that way for a whole year. It wasn't a conscious thing, but I was obviously unconsciously holding myself in a quite rigid, mustn't bump into people, must be careful with where I'm putting my body. and to let it move in a way, and to understand that my body is still strong and can still do all the things I could do before I lost an eye, was so very powerful. And you're like the personification of that with your double triple backflips and stuff that I see on Instagram. It's very inspiring. So
Thank you. I do think that movement is so good, not only because from a physical perspective, but also from a mental perspective.
yeah.
And as you said, actually what happened for you was quite traumatic and you went through a lot. And also not only the fact that you actually had to go through surgery, but then the grief of losing what you looked like before and what
Yeah.
happened, and then that vision from that side and adapting to a whole new world. I know that I am grateful of my story being actually my lease of life came back when I had my eye out. So I know that that's different. But equally, there are parts of my almost identity that were attached to the way that I looked before.
Yeah.
And there is that, oh, this is me, this is different. And I think movement is so good for both your physical and mental health. I think it's so important. And if you can move with people that also kind of get that feeling,
Yes.
that get that maybe there's you faced a fair few challenges along the way with that. And I've met through doing these adaptive sports other people with, say, a prosthetic limb, or who have hearing impairment, or who are like a wheelchair user, but just have all these different needs and impairments and have all been through their own story. And it definitely resonates that, just be kind. You don't know what's happened to people.
Yes.
But also actually finding movement together is really, really nice, and it creates such a community of people that it's brilliant.
It gives me goosebumps, really, because what's going on energetically with that as well is that, there's so much bravery in that room. All of you have been through so much, and you're all collectively saying, no, this isn't going to define me. It's not going to beat me. We're still moving our body. We're still creating joy. And that is very special.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think it's something I found such a passion for. I say I wish I discovered it sooner, but I'm a big believer of discovering it at the right time. I do feel like this has been so brilliant to have in my life over the last few years. I Like I said, that would be my biggest encouragement for other people to experience something similar. And that's one of the things we've tried to share so that they can.
Yeah. And what would so if somebody's listening going, oh, I might quite like to try something like that, is there somewhere people could look or go to search this kind of thing in their area?
I haven't found, unfortunately, like a search engine that tells you what sports offer adaptive categories, but I do think that people are way more open to trying to help you than we think they might be. So when I was looking, because I was looking to find an adaptive sport in the summer, and that's how I found High Rocks. I was literally just Googling who has an adaptive category for vision impairment. And when I approached a coach who owns a High Rocks gym, he couldn't have said yes faster. He's
Oh.
never been an adaptive coach. He's never been a guide runner either, which I did use during the race. But his immediate answer was, yes, how can I help? And I think that is so, again, that's just something that if you don't ask, you don't get. And I'm a big believer of asking. It is hard because you feel like you might be turned down, or you might be felt to be different. But if you don't ask, they literally can't say yes.
Yes.
And I think some people are so willing to help and help you find your way, that I would encourage people to approach whatever aspect of sport they wanted, because most people are willing to help you find your way through. Like, even going back to gymnastics when I was like 9, trying to forward roll on the beam, they worked with me tirelessly until I could do it. And I managed to do it in a competition. I remember, I'm pretty sure my mum cried because I literally stood it up and did roll off the side. But it's one of those things that if you find the right people to support you, even if they don't necessarily understand the impairment or what you've been through to be there, they might not fully empathize, but they can certainly sympathize. And also, I am a big fan of saying what you might need, not necessarily demanding or putting out and being like, you need to do this for me, but just saying, I find this hard. Please, could you help me? Can we find a way through together? Does this have an option for me that would make it easier for me? And again, I generally find the answer is yes. And I am so sorry for the people who experience and know, because that can feel really hard. But the right people will say yes. And again, finding an employer that says, can have an occupational health appointment and we'll get you a bigger screen. And
Mm,
if you need an eye break, you let us know. Finding that again is priceless, and it doesn't exist everywhere, but it does exist. And
mm.
I think finding it is really powerful.
Yeah, and I think in my experience that where it doesn't exist is generally not through lack of people wanting for it to exist. It's because they just don't know. They don't understand what's hard and what's not. Unless an employer already has somebody who has similar impairments, how could they? Why would they know?
Yeah,
And so to share that
absolutely.
with them, my experience is that most people are really open and actually really curious to go, gosh, I didn't realize that affected you in that way. Tell me more. Tell me
Yeah,
more. And then tell me how I can help more. And also, from a coaching and sports point of view, a lot of people who get into sports coaching and are running teams or clubs or groups, they're doing that because they want to help people, right? They love people to be able to move their body. So it would be really counterintuitive for them to then go, no, I'm not going to help you. It's just probably
yeah.
not in their makeup.
Absolutely. And it's also one of those things that, you saying that people don't necessarily know. I feel like I do have the confidence to turn around to people and say, this is what I need. And I know not everybody does, but I
Mm.
think if you do have the confidence, it's really helpful to advocate for those who maybe don't. So
Yes.
from my perspective, I will go up to somebody and say, this would really help me, because not only might it help me, but it might help the next person who comes along with a similar issue to mine, who doesn't ask for what they need. And they
Yeah.
might go, oh, we had a lady like this before. This is what helped her. Would this help you? It just helps with that education and awareness. And so that was one of the reasons behind me creating my sort of social media, was not only to potentially be that person that says, this is what happened to me and this is the documentation of my story, because I didn't have someone who did that for me, but also, if if you don't maybe need that part of the story, but I might be able to share what works for me and prompt other people to think, oh, that might work for so and so who has a similar thing, or just education, awareness, that sort of normalizing that this is different, but it's not normal. If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And this takes me on to something that I'd love to delve into more with you. So, for anybody who doesn't already know, on social media, you are the Monocular Doctor and you have a fairly big Instagram following and you post some super useful content for people who are vision impaired and have one eye. The reason I personally know that is because when I lost my eye, the first thing that I did, literally sat in hospital, was go, right, okay, the doctors have told me all's going to be fine in a couple of months. But in honesty, I didn't believe them. I needed, as you said earlier, I needed to see some people that were living that life to show me that it was going to be okay. And what the doctors were saying I would be able to do was actually achievable. I went online and I searched fairly thoroughly, and you were the only British person that I could find. I found a few Americans, and a lot of them were much, much further along the journey or not sharing what I would class as helpful content, which is what you've just started to touch on about, this is how this experience is for me and this is what's helpful. So what I found in your social media was super useful. So first of all, thank you.
Thank
um,
you.
and yeah, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what started you off sharing that and how's that evolved over time and how does it feel now?
Great question. I think I what started it was definitely the idea of, firstly, education and awareness, but also trying to empower other people to not necessarily do the same thing, but to just have the confidence to go after what they wanted, and
Mm,
show that there are possibilities outside of maybe what they had thought of. And it sounds like that's what happened for you, which is great, because that was the whole point. I do think that it has become something that I feel we can get caught up in, how many followers we have, or how many likes we get on social media. But what has been so powerful for me is speaking to people like yourself, who said, I found you when I needed you. Or I have had a couple of conversations with people who, even one person who was in almost exactly the same position I was, but 6 months behind me.
oh,
So
wow.
they'd said, you need to have your eye removed. He had sort of experiences with previous surgeries and trauma, but he was much younger, and he actually had a similar eye to me, which I didn't know anybody else did. And And I was able to chat to him beforehand and share what had happened to me. And I'm always very careful to sort of say, this is my experience. This is how it feels for me. This is what my life looks like. This is what my recovery looked like. This was what my life was like before. And very aware of the fact that, as even we've discussed today, not everybody's experience is the same. Barely anybody's is the exact same. But what has really helped me to understand is the value of what I'm putting out there is bounced back to me in the people who have said, you know, what was it like for you? Can we chat? And they found me because of my social media page. So that has been so heartwarming and so, I don't even know the word to describe it fulfilling, I think is the word. You know, that was the whole point. It's really, really nice to feel that that has been achieved, no matter how successful the latest reel is or how many likes you get or whatever. It doesn't matter, because the purpose of what I put it out there for is being achieved.
Yeah, and really, if one person that really needed to see that day sees that piece of content, then the impact has been had. And I guess the purpose is that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I have enjoyed about combining my experiences with adaptive sport is also that I'm not trying to just reach people with a visual impairment.
Yeah.
It's fantastic to reach those people, but also to try and put out there that you might have an impairment or a chronic condition or something that is really hard to deal with, but just trying to empower those people to go after what they want and work in the direction of whatever their goal is, and just empower them, I guess is the best word.
Yeah. And I wonder whether we could speak to this a little bit. So, through my short journey compared to yours, there's been lots of times where it's felt really difficult. Definitely to start with, really scary, getting back out into the world, relearning everything, regardless of processing grief and all of that thing. Just physically, things have felt scary and hard. And I'm sure you've had a lot of that too, especially going into the sports arena that you are in. I wonder if you have any insight or tips or things that you would use yourself to get you through those difficult periods, to perhaps try and manage some of the more anxious, unhelpful thoughts. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and I think probably my greatest experience from anxious thoughts as to the what ifs or the challenges that I face are probably more so with my left eye now, and the prospect of needing more surgery or the potential that I might lose the remaining vision that I have. And that may happen tomorrow, that may never happen, but it's a still uncomfortable position to sit in. And something that has always helped me is what I like to call my contingency plan. So if that happened, what would I do? And I find the sports side of things actually to be really helpful, because I know that if anything, I will be more classifiable in sports with a greater visual impairment. And I know that I would put work into that and go after that. And that helps me to know, okay, well, if my current direction were to have almost like a stop sign put in front of it, which path would I take? Where would I go? What would I do? And I'm not trying to say it should be a pessimistic view of, well, this is going to happen, because it may never happen. But knowing what I would do if helps me a lot. And that's how I generally deal with that anxiety, because I think if you sit with it too much, it doesn't make you happy, because you worry about what would be or what could be. And is that hard? Absolutely. But it's not helpful to do it all the time. I think it's good to question, and it's good to do with what works for you, but to get lost in the what ifs mean that you don't stay present, and you also don't necessarily feel the gratitude for what you do have. And when you're in a moment of, oh my word, I've got cancer, I've just lost my eye through trauma, it's really difficult to pull out what you're grateful for in that moment. But I do think gratitude practice is massive. And it's certainly not going to do any harm if you can think of 3 things on that day that you think you're really happy or really grateful for. So for me, even if I cannot come up with anything on that day, I know in my heart I'm always grateful that I have my husband, that I have my family, and even it might be things like my dog. I have a rescue greyhound, and I love her to bits. It's one of those things that if there's nothing else on that day, there are those, and that's something for me to hold on to. So I think trying to be present, trying to be grateful for what I do have, and then having that kind of okay, well, if this did happen, what paths do I have as options?
Mm,
That personally helps me. It may not work for everybody, but
mm.
that is what works for me, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess having that contingency plan, if that's what we're calling it, I think it means that perhaps you just feel you have a bit more license over whatever that life might look like, rather than just going, "Oh, I become a victim of it. If that happens, how will I not be the victim of it? How will I still find joy and gain control?" And that must, well, I know it brings a level of comfort to know that actually not everything will be taken out of my hands.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'd like to just add a little word on the gratitude piece. When I lost my eye, obviously, as we've said, it was quite traumatic. At the point where I was working through processing that and in kind of grief, despair, I didn't really have the capacity for what I would call, or what I was able to call gratitude. But I knew that focusing on good things and letting go of the more difficult things is super powerful. So instead of calling it a gratitude practice, I just wrote down, I called it a journal as the weeks flow. And at the end of each week, I would sit down and write some good things that had happened in that week. And I didn't have enough in me to go, I'm grateful for, grateful just wasn't a word that I could quite reach at that point. But I could definitely go, I poured water in a cup and I didn't spill it on the side.
And it might be that small, right? It might be something that to other people might feel really minimal, but you're allowed to say, that was good.
That was
And
good.
and and that's sometimes all it takes to get started.
That's right. And then kind of going with this 1% rule, that built over time. So as I started to feel better, my, you could call it achievements list, was slightly bigger things. And it's actually really beautiful to look through that now and understand that at the beginning, those things were so tiny, but they made a big difference. Now, of course, I can sit with loads of things that I'm super grateful for. I'm able to say the word gratitude. But yeah, for anybody that's really in the kind of trenches at the moment, I think that sometimes taking the pressure off saying you must find things that you could be grateful for is actually quite handy. And just
Yeah.
go, yeah, let's just list things that were good, the odd thing that was
Yeah.
good.
100%. And again, that journey looks different for everybody, but it's almost like having that as a goal, like I will get better at this. You know?
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
and it's just practice.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan that practice for progression, not so much for practice for perfect, but practice for progression, because even with that one eye limitation or, things that might be harder, it's not that they're necessarily impossible, they're just
Mm,
harder.
mm,
And you can still work towards them. Like one of the things I was absolutely desperate to do was do a back handspring. So rather than standing up and walking back onto your hands, it's a jump back onto your hands, which my dodgy joints loved me for. But again, I would set myself up wonky and I would jump back onto my hands being a slightly different angle. And it was something that I was so determined to do. And I see people learn this sort of skill in, a couple of months and they'll be able to do it. And I'm also in my 30s, so it wasn't a great time to pick it up. But I was so determined. And somebody the other day actually said, "Oh, well, you can do that because it's you." I said, "No, no, I could do that because I worked so hard for it.
yes. Yeah.
So hard. It was like 5 times a week I was trying to practice this thing." It was a real achievement to be like, I worked for that.
Mm,
And again, with the running side of things, because I like I said, just did the high rocks, and that's very much obviously a strength and endurance sport. And to try and do a half marathon with my sister. And I came last in cross country every year in school. I was that you're not an endurance sport person. And that became like a fixed belief that I can't run.
right.
Well, no, I can run. It's just
Mm,
hard. My eye might affect me in running because somebody might come past me, or I might not see a puddle and then wet my trainer, which is far from ideal. But in the sense of actually, I could do it. It was just hard. And I'm not a good runner and I'm not going to be running in competitions. But the fact that I can do it is that, like, I did that, it's so
yes.
rewarding. And
Yeah.
so even if your goal is pour water in a cup without spilling it, it feels good. It feel
Mm,
that real like rush of I did that. I
mm,
worked for that and now I can do it.
mm.
And so I think it might not feel like you want to do all the necessarily adaptive sports just yet if you're just in the position of losing your eye. But it's nice to know they're there. I think that's a good thing. But it is also okay that your goal is get my water in my cup, pour myself like a glass of something without spilling it. That might just be the initial goal for now, but you can build on it, you can work on it, and you can work towards what you want.
I'm finding what you're saying about adaptive sport really inspiring right down at the other end of the scale, because I think to kind of wrap that up, what we're talking about here is retraining your mind and your body to do something that it was used to doing in a different way previously. So for me, I had to relearn how to do everything pretty suddenly with one eye, and I have no light perception on that side, so completely blind patch on that side. And I found that really scary to start with, especially outside of my home. But I realized pretty quickly it's only going to be scary a few times. And then all I need to do is rewire some neural pathways, teach my brain and my body that it is actually safe, and then keep doing those things until they feel normal again. And that's kind of what you're saying with the sport. You know, to start with, you were flipping backwards and you were wonky. All you needed to do was do it enough times until your body understood which the right way was. And then it became a habit. The pathway was there. It's not scary anymore. And then it's just a point of honing that skill. And it's exactly the same right at the other end if you've just lost an eye.
Yeah. And I think even then, there are so many little things that I do to adapt my way through life with one eye that I don't even realize that I'm doing. It might be something like when I'm doing an eyeliner on this side, I rest my finger so I know exactly how far away my face is with the pen. And it's things like that. And you think, oh, yeah, nobody else does that. But you just do it. You just find your way through doing it. And if I'm going to, if I was going to pour something on a glass, I sometimes need to rest the jug or the bottle on the edge so I know that I'm not going to miss. But you, again, don't necessarily, other people don't always see that either. They don't realize that anything's different. So even though I didn't have to relearn it, I have still learned things along the way that mean that I can adapt to what I need to do. And that might be, you know, a different set of things to what somebody who's just newly going through it is. But I think it's good to find the way that works for you. And it's great to pull ideas from different people with, say, other visual impairments and things like that. But it's just remembering that what works for them might not work for you. And again, for me, having had it longer, what works for me might not work for somebody who's just, you know, freshly had their eye removed. But I think I would encourage people to find what does work for them, because as you say, then you can expand that comfort circle. Because I guess when you just have your eye removed, that comfort circle feels really small.
Yes.
And what you want to do is make it bigger again.
Yes.
You can only make it bigger by putting yourself into a slightly uncomfortable position, which is really hard. And I know that in my mind, I know that I would be in the exact same scenario if the vision went down in my left eye and my remaining eye. And I know that. And I think being aware of that is helpful. But if you don't get any prior warning, then, you know, it can be really hard. Expanding that kind of comfort makes those sorts of things possible to go and achieve.
Yeah. And I kind of had that realization in the period where I started to leave my home and everything felt really scary. It was like, I don't like this feeling because I'm not somebody that was used to moving through the world scared. So I really don't like this feeling. But I've worked out I only need to do things a few times before they feel less scary. Therefore, for the next 2 months, I'm going to do as many scary things as I possibly can. Because if I'm feeling uncomfortable anyway, I'm just going to cram it all in, do all the things that feel horrible. And then hopefully in 2 months' time, they won't feel horrible anymore. And it worked. So yeah, there we go.
But good on you for having that mindset as well, because I can't imagine that was easy to achieve and maintain. And I think also, you know, we're having a really positive conversation about what is possible after having your eye removed and the life that you can live. But I think it's so important and valuable to, if you're somebody potentially listening to this, to know that having the day where you wish it was different is okay and is completely normal. And having that day, you know, for yourself where you grieve what you had before and to turn around and be like, you know what, this is really hard. And to have those moments and those days where you have those feelings are still valid. And I still have them now, even though I didn't have vision before and things like that, you know. So I do think that it is important to know that they are still valid. But for me personally, the thing I don't like to do is sit in them for too long,
Yes.
because then I don't keep moving forwards. And if something happens for me, I have this is my own personal, I don't recommend it to everybody. It's just what works for me is that I give myself like a 24-hour moping period. If
Yeah.
I'm feeling down, or if I'm feeling sad, or if something has happened, or something hasn't gone my way, I give myself a 24-hour moping period, and I'm allowed to mope and feel sad for myself for 24 hours. After my 24 hours, I'm still allowed to feel sad, but I'm not allowed to let it stop me doing what I was doing. So it's, for example, if I had a workout planned, it's not doing it. I would still have to go and do it. Even though I feel sad, I'm allowed to feel sad, but I still have to go and do it because I can't stand still for too long, because again that comfort circle starts to get smaller again, doesn't it, if you sit still for too long. But I think it is really important to know that those feelings are still valid and they still happen to both of us as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm really glad that you said that, because during this period that probably sounded, wow, she was really brave during those 2 months. She did as many hard things as possible. What I didn't say was that was peppered probably every day with tears and sadness and feeling like I didn't want to do what I was doing. But I also inside deep down knew that what I did was focus on what was on the other side of that fear. So for me, there were two options. It was let the fear stop me and take hold and make my life very, very small, or push through an uncomfortable period that's going to feel really horrible and I'm going to be upset about a lot. But on the other side, have a more expansive, more joyful life. And to me, that was a no-brainer. But you're absolutely right. It didn't come easily. And
No.
I love what you said about the 24-hour period. I too had a deep feeling that I wanted to let the sadness out and I wanted to process it, but I didn't want to get lost in it and stuck to a point where I couldn't get out. So I would let myself cry and rage and, all of the things that comes with grief. But I actually used music as a way, music and movement. If I'd had a period like your 24-hour sadness period was, right, okay, still feels horrible, but I'm going to put the happiest playlist that I've got and I'm going to dance around my kitchen and sing really loudly and I'm going to shake and I'm going to move that out of my body and try and do something proactive to change the mood. And it seemed to work. It didn't always work for very long, but yeah, it worked.
Yeah, I think that's the thing though, isn't it? When you have those two options of you have sit still or carry on, those are basically kind of the two options really, aren't they? And as you said, you knew for yourself that sitting still in those thoughts wouldn't end well necessarily for you. And I always sort of argue the point that if you give it a try, it might not work. You might still feel sad, or you might feel sad again 10 minutes after your dance, but you've got a chance of it working.
Yes.
And I like the idea of a possibility that it could end well, because for me, between those two options, there is no possibility in the other side. And I think that helps me a lot to keep me motivated to think, well, okay, well, it might not work. It might not end how I want it to end. But my dad has this phrase that he talks about: go and shake a tree and see what falls out of it. Because
I love
in the adaptive world, I have gone and shaken a bunch of trees. And what I haven't told you about is all the things that I have maybe tried or had a go at, or something that just haven't been for me or haven't worked. Because those are less exciting stories, but they exist. And it's just about going, like shaking a tree and going, was anything falling out? Oh, no, that did. I like that. Follow that path. And whereas if you never shake the tree, nothing will fall out. And I think it's that idea of chance. It's still a chance, and sometimes we don't like the odds when it's not a definite, but it's a chance worth taking in my mind.
Yeah. And I wonder whether there's more power in that metaphor as well, because, for example, if we were shaking a tree to get some apples out and no apples fell out, we probably wouldn't stand next to the tree and berate it for having no apples for a long time either. So I wonder if there's a piece as well, not only about the power of the possibility of what could fall out, but the letting go of something that doesn't have any fruit for you and moving along to the next tree is probably a pretty powerful metaphor as well. And that's something I tried to practice with my writing down the good things that happened. I never allowed myself to write down bad things that happened, because it was like, let go of them, move on to a new tree and shake for some more fruits.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lovely.
Absolutely.
So Do you have any funny or amusing stories about things you've done or have happened to you, kind of vision related?
I think the funniest one was most recently with my para cheer team. So this is a team for cheerleaders who all have disabilities within the Paralympic spectrum. And I am currently one of their flyers. So instead of lifting people, I'm going in the air. And I was on top of another visually impaired person, which first of all is quite it's something in itself. But to be able to dismount from her hands, I was supposed to bend down and then be lifted off by another person, and I completely misjudged the depth of where I was supposed to squat to, and just sat down on her head. And it was we all had an absolute like real giggle about it afterwards, but it was just a complete misjudgment of my body in space and time, and obviously not seeing what I was doing. I mean, nobody was harmed in the story, but oh my, we all had such a giggle about it afterwards, because it was one of those things that her comment was, I was waiting for you to come off and it all just went dark. I just sat on her. So that's probably my most recent funny story.
Well, that is a pretty good one. I think that might win the competition so far. You have to laugh about these things, though, don't you?
You do. And I think because it was to do with both of us, and both of us have a similar impairment, we just couldn't help but just laugh together about it.
Okay, we've covered a lot about what this has taught you already, but what I like to ask everybody is, what are the things that most spring to mind when I ask you, what has this experience taught you?
I think a couple of things that I've probably kind of dotted in along the way, but I think the biggest things are to not be afraid to go after what I want, despite anything that life or your body or anybody else decides to throw in your way, because things are still possible. I was mentioning before about how I was glad that I gained confidence in my appearance before I had my eye removed. And I hold dear to that. This is my face, this is my body, and these are my values, and trying to learn more about myself in that way. And I'm glad it gave me that confidence. But it's also given me that confidence of, like I say, going after what I want and being almost unwaveringly determined in so many aspects, because it's then meant I have got, I have experienced so much, and I've got involved in lots of things and met so many fabulous people, and, been on a world stage and got world medals and all these kind of really cool things that if you'd have asked me when I was 12 and said, you'll go to worlds and you'll be an English powerlifting champion and you'll be on a para cheer team and you'll go and do an adaptive high rocks. Sorry, what? I would have not believed you.
Yeah.
But that has definitely taught me like unwavering determination. So yeah, grateful for that.
Yeah, lovely. And then if we imagine that this podcast is being heard by somebody who's just lost an eye, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them?
Definitely take it at your own pace and find your own space and time with what your needs are, and don't necessarily compare that journey to other people's. I mean, you and I ourselves have got completely different journeys.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to remind anybody who's going through it that your journey doesn't have to look like anybody else's. But what I would want them to know is that there are so many things that are possible when they're ready for them.
Yes.
And just not to be afraid to explore those spaces, because they do exist. The people who want to help you do exist, and the adaptions do exist. And to try and figure out what you might need so that you can go and ask for it. It might be offered, which would be lovely, but even if it's not, to go after and say, this would help me, I'm finding this really hard, is okay. And just hope that they feel that that's possible. I think that would be my biggest hope for anybody who's in that position and maybe feeling a bit lost, is to hope that it doesn't last for them, and that they keep building that comfort zone outwards so that they can get involved in all these lovely things that we've talked about if they want to.
Yeah, and what you, and hopefully I, in a slightly lesser respect, are showing them is that there's huge opportunity and huge life after losing an eye. It's just finding the adaptations and being able to ask for what you need, having that confidence in yourself, I guess. and confidence to just be authentically yourself. I've found that in the last 18 months, I've been more authentic than ever, and it's brought wonderful things. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And then hopefully they will feel the same way.
Yes. Is there anything else you've been meaning to talk to us about, Hattie?
I think one thing I would have wanted to know in the position of like pre-surgery and having, say, a prosthetic was I had absolutely no idea how eyes were made. I had no idea. And I'm under the National Artificial Eye Service in the UK, and I believe that the other option is being under Moorfields in London to make prosthetic eyes in the UK. And the mould and the fitting is a bit like a dentistry mould almost, in a way, that gets put into your eye, and then they very, very cleverly make you a prosthetic eye. And I think if I'm correct in saying that, for anybody who's maybe listening to this, yours is purple and your original eye is not, and my prosthetic is blue and my original eye is green. So I did not know that you could pick a color. You can go with what you want. And I've seen people have, fully gold sparkles and no iris and all sorts of things to just be whatever they want it to be. They can have it much and almost make it as invisible as possible if that's what they want. Or they can make it to be really cool and stand out and be different. And the idea that also that the socket would change potentially over time, and you might need new eyes fitting over time, and that's okay. Because I had no idea how that all happened before I had my eye surgery. I don't think I even really knew it was a job that people would have, is to make prosthetic eyes. And I think you believe that they're glass, because people used to call them glass eyes, but they're acrylic now. So I think I would have liked to have known that.
I was absolutely fascinated to sit in front of the guy who made my eye and watch him make it in wax in front of my eyes.
Yeah. So clever, isn't it?
For anybody who hasn't been through this, who's curious about what happens, they first of all squirt some silicone into your eye to take a mould of what's inside the socket. And then they pop that in some plaster of Paris. And then, I don't know if this is the same experience for you, Hattie, but this is what happened to me. The chap heated up some wax, poured that into the plaster of Paris, into the mould, and then took that wax out and got a little carving knife and shaved the wax, carved it by hand until he thought it was the right shape to go into my eye. And as he was doing that, I was just like, excuse me, what is going on in here? This is absolute craftsmanship in a doctor's office and a doctor's white kind of outfit. What are you doing?
They're so talented, aren't they? They're incredibly talented.
Yeah.
And then even going back for like polishing every year, you're going to polish my eye for me. Oh, cool, thank you. It's such a one of those things that you wouldn't necessarily know about until you had to know about it. So I think that would be my only thing I would say I would have quite liked to have known if I was in that position that we hadn't already talked about.
Yeah. And perhaps there's an interview with somebody who makes prosthetic eyes to come on the podcast. It would be handy, wouldn't it? We could dive deep.
It would.
Hattie, thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your story, sharing all of your inspirational wisdom. It's been really a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and also inviting me. And I also really appreciate what you said about finding me in the first place, because that's very fulfilling for me. As I said before, it was the whole point. So thank you so much.
Well, let's wish this podcast on the ears to lots of people that need to hear it. And if anybody else wants to find you on social media, what's your handles? Where can they find you?
I am as Monocular Doctor, all one word, on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook.
Excellent. And I will also pop links to that in the show notes.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much. It's bye for now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Take care.
What an episode. Hattie, what an inspiring woman you are. Thank you so much for sharing this story. I'm quite overloaded with the amount of juicy information that came in that podcast. The overarching theme of you do not have to let a bodily impairment stop you achieving your dreams and your goals, whether that be a visual impairment or whether that be some other sort of disability or a challenge that your body gives you. I personally found it really inspiring to hear her stories of pushing through anxious thoughts, fears, and really just keeping focused on that positive mental attitude, the shaking the tree to see what fruits fall, and the never ever giving up on what it is that you want to achieve. I also found it really lovely that Hattie didn't shy away from talking to us about the more difficult sides of processing grief and fear and anxieties around having lost an eye and future concerns over what might happen. Such valuable insights into her mind, how she approaches life, and how we can all take inspiration from that. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I'm going to link Hattie's profile and various other bits of useful information in the show notes. And by all means, if you have questions for myself or Hattie, please reach out. I'm sure both of us will be really happy to answer them. For now, I'm Charlie, and this is One Eye on the Horizon.